It's our pleasure, Dr. Spivak, to have you in our program called COVID Talks. Thank you for joining our discussion. Today, we are going to discuss with you the challenges of COVID and the future of the world. And since you're one of the founders of postcolonialist theory, I would like to discuss the influence and the challenges of COVID through the prism of postcolonial theories. So, since the outbreak of COVID-19, different thinkers, economists, experts, they started to conceptualize COVID-19 as a great equalizer. But the increasing, after weeks, increasing socioeconomic, health, and even ethnic inequalities warn us that social stratification is deepening and deepening. So, do you see any representation of post-colonial elements during coronavirus in terms of subalternization of vulnerable people? And metaphorically speaking, does the concept of subalternization generalizable?
Well, yes, of course, the abstract concept of subalternization is always generalizable. It's groups of subaltern people who are not generalizable, so that your subalterns in Armenia do not, in fact, resemble subalterns in rural Brazil. So it's, yes, the concept of subalternity is absolutely always generalizable. Well, but your more important question, subalternization, you see, if people think that making, as the United Nations is asking, giving equal opportunities to the entire country is subalternization, then I will quote something that I just read in the Huffington Post. When you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. Equality feels like subalternization. No, this is a redistribution question. This is how it should be, so that the top level realizes, if the country were really democratic, how their situation would be. No, I don't think that has anything to do with subalternization. And as for post-colonial, of course, anything is post-colonial in different ways. But I feel it applies everywhere in terms of what the relationship with colonialism, however you define it, was in the country. But this is also a very particular situation of actually beyond the political, it's biopolitical in the most, it's a phantasmagoria of biopolitics because it's about the body. So, and it is a situation where the only cure is human behavior. Since we have not found, I just came, as you know, from the Red Cross because I have antibodies and I'm going to donate. They only asked me many questions. They're going to contact me again. So I'm going to donate plasma. Now, this plasma is the only cure, but that also depends on human behavior. Now, this is completely unusual. And therefore, I think we ought to think of the situation not simply in terms of older categories like postcoloniality or subalternization, but try to think of it through its own uniqueness. As I say, it's not a moral question. The way in which human behavior is the only cure for the moment. You cover your face, you keep your distance. And this is a very middle class situation. There are millions and millions of people who cannot. So class comes in, not so much post-coloniality. Class is a much broader concept. And race comes in, gender comes in. These are older than either the post-colonial, and these are in another space from subaltern. Within subalternity, there are race problems, gender problems also. But I think rather than ask what definition will apply, we should ask ourselves, how should we try to think in terms of this plague, which does and does not resemble other plagues? Biopolitics, and no solution except human behavior, and not necessarily connected either to humanization and, oh, what a wonderful time we have, we are uniting, etc., which you see a lot of in both India and New York, my two places. Not just that, and not moral, like we must be good and so on. So these are different challenges from the old political things. And as for thinking that equality is subalternization, that's a heavy duty problem of hierarchical patrimonial states.
Yeah, but I think that equality is still a problem because, thousands of homeless families living in crowded areas, they are at higher risk of viral transmission because of limited or unavailable access to COVID-19 testing facilities, for example. And from this perspective, can this corona crisis be an opportunity for us to think about real change, or should these subordinized people still continue to the endless process of reinscription of their subordinate position in societies?
Yeah, yes, and I think that latter part, you're probably quoting something that I've said somewhere. See, this solution, that the endless process, etc., that's a long-term thing. So like most questions, short-term and long-term responses, which is also something that I say over and over again, they are different. The short-term problem-solving solutions must be carried on, but we must not forget the long-term solution. Mm-hmm. And I think, and remember, I'm not a politician. I'm a humanities teacher, activist. So for me, the most powerful thing that I can do, and I've been doing at the top at Columbia University now for 54 years. I started teaching in 1965 at an American university. And at the bottom, among the landless illiterate so-called untouchables, for 36 years, started my rural schools in 1984, I think. So therefore, the idea, the long-term solutions, they are left to us. The teachers who take a great deal of trouble to produce collectivities one-on-one, not through vanguardism and masses into class consciousness and so on. You know this because you were part of the Soviet system. So therefore, that's not what we are looking for today. We are looking for the short-term solutions, equalization through redistribution. In my country, for example, the fact that there are incredible numbers of homeless and the migrant, I mean, when I wrote you that, you thought I was talking about New York. No, I was talking about India. I'm a citizen of India. The migrant travelers, migrant workers traveling 100 miles, 200 miles, 700 miles to go home and die. So therefore, this idea that it should have been done before, you're absolutely correct. Take this as an opportunity to turn toward a kind of country where you do not have fat cats at the top and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of homeless. That's the short-term solution, but incredibly important. And then to keep that situation going, you need the long-term solution, because the basic human emotions are greed, fear, and violence. So therefore, you have to, long-term, again and again, with every generation, you have to undermine those. That's a very different thing from the absolute short-term structural solutions, which is in the hands of politicians like yourself, so that equalization doesn't look like subalternization.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
my answers are very long because I am, after all, a classroom teacher, not a soundbite person. But ask another one.
Thank you. Thank you for the answer. And thank you for touching upon this interesting issue and also sensitive issue regarding the migration and labor migration. So, and taking into consideration the different cases of forced repatriation of migrants, workers, amid COVID-19. So, can this corona crisis conceptualized or termed as migration crisis?
Yes, yes. It is many different kinds of crisis also. But I think in what we are looking at is that placeless people, stateless people, so-called illegal immigrants, so-called legal immigrants with nothing, these are the ones. And of course, the homeless, which is kind of a local, not really a migrant problem, but related. This is why the entire situation is a class situation. I'm basically a middle class person. And in the context of India, I'm an upper middle class person. But a middle class person can do this. I have a place to stay. I can distance myself. I can buy good masks on eBay, which are even, the ones that hospitals can't buy because the plastic cases were opened. Well, I have 3 or 4. I put them on, and I put on my gloves, and I take my cardiological exercise. I'm 78 years old. And so I can do these things, but it is absolutely my class position. I have a place. So therefore, through this situation, we can see that it is a very broad class problem within which the problem of migration in different forms is today crucial. In the United States, if I may just add this, it's a deportation crisis, right? It's the not letting them enter crisis. At home, it's this, in India, it is this business of going home to die, walking forever. And if they're put on trains, they're going to have to pay their train fare. And India is good in IT, so they're going to catch them. So therefore, the idea of migration in different ways, and in Europe, it's again different. It's always there. The one thing, however, that you mustn't forget before you pass on to other questions is that there's also internal displacement and war camps. Yeah. That's where, there are many war camps where gendering is extremely important today in the world. In my country, in Kashmir, and in your part of the world also, there are many. So therefore, we mustn't forget them. They're in an absolute no place. And somewhere before our 20 minutes are over, I would like to talk about the Rohingyas to perhaps right at the end. So carry on, ask your next question.
Yeah. The next question is about the using of high technologies to fight COVID-19. So different governments using different technologies to control the spread of COVID-19. So this question also can be metaphorical, but could this lead us to think that there's a risk of digital colonialization?
Yes, that's a good phrase. I also use the word digital idealism because, sometimes there was this civilizing mission within colonialism itself, which is why people said British colonialism is better than the Belgian Congo. And that's our great novel, Heart of Darkness, right? So therefore, I would say that is very true. But the digital is both medicine and poison. Okay, so we must be able to use the digital. And here again, I come back to that long term. I said to the World Economic Forum when I used to be on their ethics committee, management, the digital way of transforming knowledge, it's never going to be a matrix for social justice, which is what the Committee on Ethics wanted to do. And I have no trouble with metaphors because concepts are also metaphorical. So, and I'm after all a literature person, I think metaphor is a very strong thing. So therefore, what I said to them in a metaphor is that unless the soul is cooked slowly, nobody will be able to use the digital. It's powerful and dangerous. Otherwise, cyber crimes and hacking and all that stuff, and coming into privacy, and the taking away, corporatizing of education so much that everything in the humanities is digitized into nothingness. The digital is extremely powerful, extremely useful. We can certainly use it to manage, as you're saying. But on the other hand, we have to know that the digital, I see at my university, that the digital is being looked at as a solution to everything. But digital idealism is a very dangerous thing. So I would say that the long-term training of people so that they know how to use the digital and contain it to its own good functions. I think this COVID-19 situation, if it is to avoid your wonderful phrase, digital colonialism, this has to be kept in mind. Again, the long term.
Thank you. And the last question, since, if I'm not mistaken, you're from Calcutta, yes?
Yes.
And many years ago, Armenians lived there, and you might know Armenians. And my question is about Armenia. So during these recent years, different experts started to study Armenia through the prism of post-colonial theory. So as one of prominent theorists of post-colonialism, I would like to know whether post-colonial theory applicable to Armenia or not. Do you think that Armenia had colonial past?
Well, let me first of all say about Calcutta and Bangladesh, it's all Bengal. In Dhaka and in Calcutta, we have an Armanitola, which is the quarter where the Armenians lived. So it's we Armenians are in our history. Armenians also played along a little with East India Company, but that was very long ago. So it doesn't, you're forgiven. But at any rate, the idea, you see, the thing is, neither Iran, nor the Ottoman Empire, nor the Soviet Union are exactly colonial models. So therefore, you can see, and I teach my students not to apply models to things and transform them. You want to apply something, you will apply it. So then you will have to define colonial in a certain way, going backward from Armenia, etc. I myself think that and I moved from what I used to think maybe 20, 30 years ago. 1999 is when my critique of postcolonial reason came out, and that's already a critique. If we take everything as if everything began with capitalist colonialism, then we forget that before that play, Capital and Colony, our societies still had structures of corruption, structures of power, and so therefore, and in globality, those old longue durée structures are coming back. So we actually we can't think of social justice if we have the colonial idea and want to apply that, because the post-colonial too often is pointing fingers rather than acknowledging complicity. To my students, I say, it's the Mugabe complex. I can do anything because I was colonized. They were the ones who harmed me. That's not good scholarship. It's foregone conclusions. They were bad, we are good. So therefore, I would say, sure, you can apply it. But if you apply it, you will transform it into something. Mm-hmm. My own way of doing things is to ask the example what kind of reading it demands, so that the Armenian case is going to teach me something about how not to do postcolonial. You know what I mean? Just as my rural schools teach me something about where deconstruction is useful and how not to do deconstruction. Because in the activist situation, you see what you can use. So therefore, that's what I would say. Of course you can use it, but why? You know what I mean? That's my question.
Yeah, good question. To be honest, I never felt myself as a representation of a society that had colonial past. And first of all, we need to answer your question: is post-Soviet post-colonial? If post-Soviet is post-colonial, then we are post-colonial. But I
I
don't.
don't think so. I think the Soviet had something to do with the Soviet model is different. That's why you became economically so powerful. I mean, I believe somewhere I read that you were only second to Estonia. So that model is very different from colonial model. But within the epistemic model, there was so-called epistemic violence, which from the Soviet model, and which I have said in the context of Britain, it was enabling violation, so that now we can affirmatively sabotage those things. I don't think the Soviet model quite did that, because first of all, they didn't have enough time. Britain had forever, from the 18th century on down, first when capital began to emerge. And second of all, they went into this kind of vanguardism, whereby you really don't, I mean, the kind of almost mechanical Marxist ideology that was, because they needed to do science and so on so well. The ideology, because after all, don't forget, I am Bengali. We had a socialist state which was very friendly. Communist Party of India was very friendly to Moscow, not Communist Party Marxist, but nonetheless. So we had a sense of all of this. We are pre-Second International Communism, right? Established by M.N. Roy. So therefore, this particular situation, there was a certain kind of epistemic violence which you couldn't use. But the solution to that, Narek, is not identitarianism. It's not like we are Azeris, we are Armenians, and so on and so forth. That's a whole long story, which is what I think happened when the Soviet sort of epistemic violence was questioned by intellectuals. There was too much identitarianism. But that's a long-term discussion, which we will have when the COVID-19 situation has solved itself.
Thank you. And as a historian, I want to make last remark. So Armenians, both under the control of the Ottoman Empire, Persian Empire, Russian Empire, they always played key role in the economy, in public administration, in different spheres. And even during the Soviet time, Armenians had great influence in the hierarchy of the officials. And as you frame in your book, Other Asias, Armenia never been colony, but rather Armenia was a break between the continuation of Islam.
And indeed, in one of the speeches I gave about India to just a couple of last year in Calcutta, I talked about our so-called caste caste, which is, we are supposedly Brahmin. My brother-in-law is a caste. So there was a huge, on the bigoted side of the family, there was a lot of many problems. But these castes were the same. They were the clerics, the intellectuals, not the intellectuals, but the record keepers and so on for the Mughals. So they were, like we say in Hindi, Adha Musalman, half Muslim, right? Although Hindu caste. It's a wonderful story, these stories of the groups that kept the offices going. And I like that. That's those kinds of historical crevices that we should really pay attention to. They're not broad stroke identity politics. You didn't let me talk about the Rohingyas, but if I can take...
You have time, you can talk with pleasure, please.
Okay, so I'll just say something about the Rohingyas, because in this situation, the Rohingyas, one of the main problems with migration is that the indigenous is dislodged into another space. The Rohingyas, I don't know if you know who they are. They were people, they didn't even have this name. They were people who were local to the Arakan area at the border, near on the Bay of Bengal, the Arakan region, for millennia. I mean, Armenia also is a very old group, right? Very, very old indeed, and so are we. But these people, they are just as old. They were there, and Amartya Sen said a very nice thing. He said that Burma came to the Rohingyas because this was long before any idea of a nation state could be. And now this long-term indigenous people are being recoded genocidally with rape as an instrument of genocide, as a illegal immigrant, as groups of, imagine, the millennially indigenous are being recoded as illegal immigrants, not only in Burma, but in even more recently established country, Bangladesh. So therefore, they are a very particular kind of stateless people. So they're out in open wooden boats, and there's been a cyclone in the area. Malaysia doesn't want them. Bangladesh has been good, but they're beginning not to want them. And certainly Burma doesn't want them. China doesn't want them. India doesn't want them. And they were there before all of these states. And so therefore, the idea of understanding what to do with this, and in their camps, see, I've been activist in that area since the 80s, okay? So I can't go into that now. But therefore, the idea of how to deal with this group in their camps, so-called camps, which is in a place which is called Bhashanchar, floating away sandbank. That's what that word means. So you can imagine where their camps are. So these camps, now everybody's left. So, you know, CARE has left, the big NGOs have left, you only have the Rohingyas. And so I say to my students, look, you are unemployed humanities PhDs. You want to do some good? Join these big international civil societies and turn them around. Turn them around. That's deconstruction, by the way. Turn them around. And so that's affirmative sabotage. So that something can be done for these people who are not only unable to do any kind of distancing, but there's nothing, no help at all. I always mention them because I'm an ambassadorial member of the Free Rohingya Coalition and have been trying to work in a little way for them since the 80s. That's why I said that I will not end without mentioning the Rohingyas. Please remember the Rohingyas, and there's a lot of digital information about them. The international community must raise its voice and say that they must become people with states, however poor, who can somehow confront COVID-19, not just as a terrible killer, but something a little more. That's it. Thank you for letting me.
Thank you. And the discourse on Rwandas reminded me an article by Antonio Gramsci, written in 1916. Antonio Gramsci wrote an article on the Armenian genocide in 1960, just 1 year after the genocide. And Gramsci advised Armenians how to overcome international indifference. And he used a very excellent phrase. If a group wants to overcome international indifference and to be heard, the group should integrate into the circle of humanity. They should publish books to show who they are and what they want to be.
Of course, these people don't have anything, so they can't publish books. But I will tell you something. Antonio Gramsci knew what he was talking about. He and the Armenians were an intellectual community. It's a very different thing. But the Rohingyas have said again and again to a wonderful colleague and friend of mine, Nasiruddin, who's actually interviewed more than 500 Rohingyas, again and again, and I have little clips, etc. I sent you a webinar, a video. You'll see it in there. They say again and again, our life is not human. You see, this claiming humanity. They may be uneducated, they may be poor, but they're not stupid. So that's the thing they say. We are not leading a human life. Unfortunately, given their history, since unlike the Armenians with the Iranians, with the Ottomans, with the Soviet, in that particular slot where they kept the system going, they have not been given that kind of an opportunity. So they have to be helped in order that their own real feeling, we do not want to remain inhuman, can actually find a focus. subalterns speak. It's just that we can't complete the speech act. That's why I said they cannot speak. I didn't say the subalterns cannot talk. I said they cannot speak. And and so the Rohingyas are speaking, but nobody is hearing. So their speech act is not completed. So there's a lot of digital information about them. Take a look. Take a look. See what you can do. And if you really want to know, write me an email.
I think we politicians, intellectuals, we can support by making them heard.
Sure.
Thank you, Professor Spivak. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. I hope we can have another conversation again in future. If you don't mind, I will let you know. And thank you for joining, and thank you for sharing your ideas with the Armenian public.